All right, today we're diving into a really interesting and, let's be honest, pretty cynical trend. What exactly happens when a big name media figure gets the boot?
And that brings us to the big question, right? When you see these folks suddenly on the front lines of a protest, are you watching a real awakening? Or is it just a last-ditch effort to save a career? Let's get into it. So first, let's talk about this very modern phenomenon, the public pivot. When a fallen media star suddenly becomes a whole new kind of celebrity.
See, the trend our source material points out is this. Instead of just disappearing, these ousted personalities are pulling off a pretty dramatic rebranding. They're trying to morph from a news anchor into a frontline activist, all to stay in the spotlight. So how do they pull this off? Well, according to the source, the first step is all about crafting a very specific public image. Let's break down what's being called the hero performance. And the language used here is really telling. It's described as cosplaying a hero. That suggests it's all for show, right? Like a Hollywood version of a real struggle that just feels, well, kind of hollow compared to the real deal. And I mean, just look at this contrast. On one side, you have actual historical murders, people who gave up everything. And on the other, you've got the modern performer, who the source argues is way more concerned with becoming the main character than actually serving the cause. This quote really just hits the nail on the head. The argument is that the main goal here isn't social change, it's getting attention. The whole performance is for the cameras, not for the cause.
So if the motive has shifted, you can bet the tactics have shifted too. And this is where we move from what we traditionally think of as protest to something else entirely, provocation.
Historically, civil disobedience was seen as this incredibly noble act. Think about the civil rights movement. The whole point was to break a law you knew was unjust, and then you'd accept the consequences with dignity to prove a moral point. The power was in taking the high ground. But that's not what's being described here. Instead, we have what the source calls direct action. And this strategy isn't about morality. It's about manufacturing chaos to deliberately escalate a situation and force a reaction. And here are the goals of that provocation. It's about causing confusion, ramping up the tension, and this part is key, baiting the authorities into making a mistake. Because if you can get a cop to overreact on camera, you instantly get victim status, which is the new currency. This all sounds pretty calculated, doesn't it? Well, the source material says that's because it is. There's a whole formula at play, and it's called the rebranding playbook. Think about it. For someone who just lost a multi-million-dollar TV gig, this isn't just about their beliefs. It's framed as a cold, hard business decision. It's a marketing strategy for a career that's pretty much on life support. And here it is, the playbook, laid out in four, pretty cynical steps. First, you get fired from your big-time job. Second, you show up at a protest, any protest, as long as there are cameras. Third, you engineer a situation to get yourself arrested. And boom, finally, you use that arrest to rebrand yourself as some dangerous revolutionary, fighting the very system you were a part of just a few months ago. So, you gotta ask yourself, how credible is this, really? How does someone who is peddling these baffling on-air theories one day just suddenly become a serious activist the next? The source suggests this massive pivot makes the new persona a really tough sell. Okay, so we've seen the performance, we've gone through the playbook, but the biggest question is still, why does any of this matter? What's the actual impact here? Well, the source argues that this whole act cheapens real activism. It turns protest into performance art. It treats something as serious as a jail cell like it's a backstage green room, and it makes the idea of a revolution feel like just another reality show. And it all comes down to this single idea. This whole spectacle isn't about changing the world. It's about saving a damaged career and getting the spotlight back on. It's a rehabilitation tour. Which leaves us with one final, pretty critical thought. When activism becomes a performance for personal gain, who's the one that really pays the price? Is it the movements themselves that get hijacked? Or is it all of us, our trust in anyone who claims they're fighting for a cause? That's definitely something to think about.